looking at Parshas Vayera. If you're with me in the Art School Chumash, the Stone Chumash, you can find it on page 78. It's chapter 18 in Bereshis. Now, this week's Parasha begins with the very well-known, very dramatic uh, episode narrative of Avraham, and he is eating kechom hayom. He's not eating. He's sitting outside his tent, Kechom Hayom. He sees some passers-by. He importunes them. He runs to greet them. He importunes them to come and accept his hospitality. They eat. He doesn't eat. He is serving them. And of course, these passers-by, these uh, itinerant or passing nomads or Bedouins, of course, are actually angels, and they tell Sarah that she's going to have a child. Sarah is astonished, perhaps even skeptical. And as we know, the story continues that the Malachim then make their way, two of them in any case, to Sodom. Along the way, Avraham pleads with Hashem on behalf of the people of Sodom unsuccessfully. Subsequently, the narrative resumes with the angels arriving in Sodom, etc. And ultimately, Sodom is overturned. Lot and his family are saved. Very well known, very dramatic, much insight, much commentary has been devoted to this fascinating subject. And our friend for the year, Abarbanel, of course, is no different. He has quite a lot to say about this. He focuses, or at least the part that I would like to share tonight, focuses on the nature of the prophecy of Abraham. It says here in this edited version that I've been using, Biur Tam Gilu Eshchina Be'elonei Mamre. Why did Hashem reveal himself through the agency of these passers-by, through the angels, etc.? We'll learn more about that shortly. In Elonei Mamre. And actually, that's how the parsha begins. Vayera Elav Hashem Be'elonei Mamre. God appeared to him in the plains of Mamre. Mamre is a friend of Avraham. He must have been a landowner, and it was his territory. Avraham did not own any land, as we know. In next week's parsha, when he had to bury his wife Sarah, he had to just at that point initiate negotiations to buy some property, a freehold where he could bury her. So Avraham was living there. I'm sure he was a distinguished let's say, member of the community, but he was not a landowner, it seems. And he was there in Elonei Mamre, and the Torah says it was in Elonei Mamre. So Rashi explains why the name of Mamre is mentioned here. In any case, which Abarbanel doesn't deal with Mamre per se, but he wants to know, why does the Torah describe that this event took place in the plains of Mamre, when Abraham, was sitting Pesach HaOel at the entrance of the day, Kechom Hayom. Kechom Hayom, Abarbanel understands it to mean as the day was beginning to get hot. The night is cool, especially there in Beersheba, where it is desert climate. So at night, even if it's hot in the day, at night it gets quite cool. And as the day begins to dawn, so it's still quite cool early in the morning. As the day progresses and the sun begins to rise, then the heat of the day intensifies. Abravanel says that's when a person is getting his sort of work day underway. That's when he is beginning his activities for the day. In other words, says Abarbanel, the Torah here is describing in a subtle way that these events took place while Abraham was going about his affairs. Abarbanel does not take Rashi's view that he was recovering from his surgery and he was just relaxing, or possibly positioned outside the tent. According to Rashi, he was looking for guests. But in any case, Abarbanel seems to say that Avraham was in work mode. And when it says Vayera Lav Hashem, it's telling us something significant about the nature of Abraham's gift of prophecy. Because if we look closely at this whole episode, the parsha begins, Vayera Lav Hashem, God appeared to him. But from that moment onward, we don't find the purpose of Hashem's visit. We don't find, why did God appear to him? We find that evidently audience with God is interrupted when Abraham spies these passers-by. The Torah doesn't even say explicitly, perhaps he asks God to excuse him so that he could attend to the important matter of welcoming guests. In fact, the Gemara even says that from here we see that greater is welcoming guests than receiving the divine presence. Gadol hachnasas orchim mikabalas penei hashchina, because it begins Vayera alav Hashem. Hashem appeared to him, but we don't find that Avraham speaks to Hashem or that Hashem speaks to Avraham. What we find immediately is Vayisainav. He lifted his eyes and he saw people who were approaching. Abarbanel has a different angle on it, though, a subtle distinction. Abarbanel says that this event took place, or it certainly is narrated in the Torah, immediately after Abraham's circumcision at age 99. And says Abarbanel, it's not the first time that Abraham communes with Hashem. We find that Hashem spoke to Avram at the beginning of last week's Parasha, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, etc. But his relationship with Hashem, Avram's relationship with Hashem, reached a higher level after the Brit Milah. And that's not surprising because that's the mark of the covenant. That is an act of great loyalty, fealty, great willingness to mark himself out from the rest of mankind and to guarantee that he will pass on that conviction and that determination and that covenant to the future generations. So having achieved that, and of course all of the symbolism of the Brit Milah, which is the diminution of the physicality and the means by which a person's bond with Hashem is accentuated. It's the permanent symbol of a Jew's identity, and therefore, says Abarbanel, I won't say it's not surprising, perhaps it's going too far, but it is apt. It is intuitively satisfying to discover that the Torah here, in a subtle way that we'll describe more fully in a moment, describes how Abraham's gift of prophecy reached a higher level. In what way do we find that? So says Abarbanel, previously, when Hashem spoke to Abraham, it was always in a vision at night, or Abraham was in a trance in order to endure, or as a consequence of the overwhelming impact of the divine revelation. But here, says Abarbanel, we find the whole narrative is part of the Nevuah. The whole narrative takes place while Avraham is communing with Hashem. Contrary to what I said before, that the Gemara interprets that from here that we see the greatness of the mitzvah of welcoming guests. Just make a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyado. And Avraham paused or perhaps even terminated his audience with Hashem in order to greet the guests. Abarbanel doesn't see it that way. Abarbanel says that Hashem appeared to Avraham, and while Hashem and Avraham were communing, Avraham also simultaneously had the capacity to jump up from his seat, to run to greet his putative guests or the passers-by, to seek to persuade them to accept his hospitality, to run to the herd and to arrange for the calf and for the butter and for we'll speak about that in Smichas Chaber, by the way, this week, the calf and the butter. To instruct Sarah to prepare goat for them, Lushi go. So all of that, says Abarbanel, took place while Avraham continued to commune with Hashem. And he says that he was able to do that excuse me, because he ascended to this more exalted level of nevuah, or the capacity for nevuah, after the Brit Milah. Now, what's fascinating here, we've called this year, by the way, I forgot to say, a dream within a dream. And I seem to recall in the deep recesses of my memory that like eloquent, maybe slightly uh, intriguing turn of phrase was written by a great poet. And so it was with the greatest of ease I was able to find that that is the title of a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, who published it in 1849, the year of his death, at the age of 40. And uh, the most famous line in that poem is, "All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream." And that is apt for our discussion tonight, because according to Abarbanel, the angels or the passers-by or the angels in the guise of people came to visit Abraham. And Abraham was able to commune with Hashem while greeting his guests. He was able, in simple language, to multitask. He was able to simultaneously commune with Hashem while performing the great mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim. And that's why, says Abarbanel, we don't find the content of the divine visitation. It just says, Vayera Hashem, Hashem appeared to him, because it was through the angels that Hashem appeared to him. It was through the conversation, through the dialogue. That was all part of the divine revelation. And we find that as soon as they leave, Avraham begins this negotiation for the salvation, for the rescue of the people of Sodom. It's true that we have like an editorial aside in which the Torah says that Hashem said to himself, so to speak, "Shall I withhold from Avraham my intentions for Sodom?" Which is no doubt a way of saying that Hashem disclosed to Avraham, but it was all part of the Nevuah. Now, that's what Abarbanel says, but I want to put this in the context of other Meforshim. You may or may not be aware that this whole event is the subject of a fundamental and, let's say, forceful dispute between the Rambam and Ramban. Rambam, Maimonides, of course, is the rationalist, and he maintains that all of this narrative was all part of Abraham's prophetic vision. It never happened. It didn't happen in actuality. The Rambam says that, and he brings a few proofs to it, that essentially, he says, I'll just read you a few words from the Ramban's citation of the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. He says, Ki nira elav Hashem b'maros hanivuah. Hashem appeared to Avraham in a prophetic vision. And what was the vision? The vision was that Avram lifted up his eyes within the prophetic encounter. He lifted up his eyes and he beheld, again in a prophetic vision, that the passers-by were approaching him, and he ran to greet them in the vision, and he welcomed them into his tent in the vision, and he instructed Sarah, and he ran to the flock, or to the herd for the calves. It was all in the vision. That's what Rambam maintains, but Ramban is excoriating in his critique. He says this is preposterous. If that's the case, he says, I'm only mentioning one of his objections. He said, and if that's the case, then if it was all a vision and the angels and the passers-by never came to Abraham, then they never would have gone to Sodom. If they never gone to Sodom, then Lot would have remained in Sodom. It's only because the angels uh, uh, took hold of Lot and some members of his family, two of his daughters, his wife in the end stayed behind, as we know, and his married daughters stayed behind. But Lot was rescued from Sodom. Well, how did they ever get rescued from Sodom if there were no angels and it was all just a vision? It was all just in the mind's eye of Avraham Avinu. Says Ramban, Va'ele dvarim sosim hakasuv. These words contradict what is written in the Torah. Asur l'shom am. It's forbidden to listen to them. Afki la'aminam, and la'amin b'hem, and all the more so to believe in them. So this is quite strong language from Ramban. Uve emet in his critique of Rambam. Uve emes ki chol makom shuzkar b'kosav rias malach or dibur malach. But actually, and here the commentaries explain that Ramban, although he was scathing in his rejection of the words of the Rambam, but actually he partly acknowledges the view of the Rambam. He says, actually, kichol makom shuzkar b'kosav, wherever it's mentioned in the Torah, rias malach, to see an angel, or dibur malach, or the words of an angel, hu b'mar'eh, or b'chalom, it's in a vision or in a dream, ki ha'hergeshim lo yesigu ha'malachim, because a person's senses, his sense of sight, his sense of hearing, will not perceive an angel. If we have any description in the Torah of hearing an angel and seeing an angel and conversations with an angel, it will only take place in a prophetic vision, which in some cases, by the way, might be imposed by divine uh, uh, providence on a person who's not exceptionally exalted or refined or spiritually great. We find that Hashem appears to Avimelech and to Paro and to Manoach, converses with a Malach in the book of Shoftim, in the book of Judges. So occasionally, for that matter, in the book of Jonah, God is speaking to the whale as well. So we do find sometimes that Hashem will reveal Himself through an agency of an angel to those who are not inherently deserving of it. So the Ramban acknowledges that whenever we find the description of an angel discussing or hearing or talking to or seeing, it always is going to be only in a prophetic vision. But, says Ramban, these events certainly actually did take place and they did happen. Now, Abarbanel, one of the things which he does as a matter of part of his style is to cite the Rambam, to cite the critique of the Ramban, and to seek to defend the Rambam. And he does this at length here and elsewhere as well. I want to suggest that the approach that Abarbanel expresses, that we have explained, that it was all part of the communion with Hashem, and that Avram was able to multitask. He was able to retain and extend his prophetic interaction with the Almighty, maybe through an angel, while simultaneously also greeting his guests, etc. Says Abarbanel, this was Avraham became capable of this after the circumcision. He says in this way he was able to extend or to maintain his communion, or he's supposed to do so, his sense of introspection and his elevation to a level of prophetic experience while these events were actually unfolding. And when it says that the angels left, the Torah tells us, just point out the pasuk, Va'avraham odenu omed lifnei Hashem, just to point out where that is. Ve'akumu misham ha'anashim. If you take a look at pasuk Tes Zayin on page 80, Vayakumu misham ha'anashim, the men, that is to say, these angels in the guise of men, arose. V'yashkif al penei Sodom, and they gazed down at Sodom. Va'avraham olech imam lishalcham, and Avraham was accompanying them to send them off. And then we have the verse that I mentioned earlier, where Hashem, so to speak, says, the Torah doesn't say to whom, but it's evidently a way that Hashem revealed to Abraham his intention. And it says, and then I think it says later on, Abraham after the extended, unsuccessful negotiations, it says, Vayelach Hashem kasher kila ledaber el Avraham, va'Avraham shav limakomo. And then Avraham went back to his place. I didn't find the word it says Avraham Odenu Omed Lifnei Hashem. But in any case, we find that as the events are described in the Torah, simultaneously, Abraham is still engaged, still like um, connected to this prophetic vision. So far, we have set out the approach of Abarbanel. We have explained why it was in Elonei Mamre, because Abarbanel says the whole point was that these events happened while Avram was going about his business. He was doing what he normally does, or he was maybe just getting ready to go out to work as Chom Hayom, as the sun began to rise and the day began to get warm. And the Torah is telling us that after the Milah, even though he was doing these things, he was still connected to Hashem. I want to add, in the minutes we have left, a very interesting passage that is found in Michtav Me Eliyahu. You can find it if anyone would like to look it up. It's in the first volume, um, page 34, in what's known as the Kuntras HaChesed. And there we have a very fascinating and, as we shall see, perhaps controversial um, citation on the part of Rav Dessler in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. We find a certain medrash. It's called Medrash Talpiot. Now, this medrash is not an ancient medrash collection like Medrash Rabbah or Tanchuma. It was published about 300 years ago, written by a certain rabbi in Izmir, a distinguished rabbi. He also wrote the book Shevet Musar, and he called it Medrash Talpiot. It's a collection of Kabbalistic and other passages that are found in the Zohar and other early sources. He quotes a Medrash which actually first appeared in the writings of Rabbi Menachem Azariah, known as the Ramah with an ayin mipano, a very interesting, important, influential Kabbalistic Italian rabbi, quoted by the Shach and many others, very influential, interestingly. And that is where this medrash is found. I don't believe that Ramah Mipano just made it up. He must have found it in an earlier source. But let me tell you what the medrash says, or what the medrash is purported to have said. The Rav Dessler says, he quotes it as follows, that there was a personality who lived in the early generations of mankind called Chanoch. And Chanoch is evidently described as a righteous, as evidently he was a very righteous person, because it says that he did not die, but Hashem took him. He was taken by God, not the usual pattern of a person who lived this many years and then he died. There's something very special about this man, Chanoch. It's interesting, Chanoch remains even to this day a fairly popular biblical name. Of course, we find Chanoch later in the Torah as well. But in any case, this one is the famous Chanoch. What was he all about? So this medrash, this sort of intriguing medrash says that Chanoch was a cobbler. He was a shoemaker. And each thread or each stitch that he would sew in, like assembling the shoes for his customer, haya meyached yichudim lekono. It's an expression of he would like unify his creator. It's a way of saying, it's usually understood in as a Kabbalistic, a mystical way of saying that he like achieved, or he explored or contemplated profound aspects of the higher realm, about the nature of God, subjects that are transcend the curriculum of the normal even student or even scholar, something which is, reflective of the most gifted and profound thinkers. Meyached yichudim lekono. So Rav Dessler says in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the great founder of the Musar movement, asked on this medrash, how could it be that as he was pursuing his craft and fulfilling a commission for a customer to sew for him or to construct for him a shoe that he could walk in, that he could use to walk upon, which is what shoes are all about, how could it be that this Chanoch had other things on his mind? Is it acceptable for a person who has been commissioned to do a job to the best of his ability to allow his mind not just to wander, but to be fully immersed in some speculation, in some profound philosophical or metaphysical contemplation? What about the work he's supposed to be doing for his customer? That's his question. So Rabbi Sol Salanter says, according to this citation in Michtam Eliyahu, that the meaning is that as he was stitching the shoes, he would endeavor to do so in the most skillful way, in the most thorough way, in the most precise way, in the most durable way, so that he would produce for his customer the best shoe that he could possibly produce. That was the way in which he was devoted to the creator, to his creator. The way he was contemplating the oneness of God was by emulating the ways of Hashem, which seek to bestow kindness on the world. So the kindness that this Chanoch was bestowing, presuming he was paid for it as well, but even so, he sought to do the best that he could for his customer. And therein lies his yichudo, meyached yichudim lekona. This, I find, is reminiscent of the approach of Abarbanel, that as Avraham was doing Hachnasas Orchim and talking about calf and about butter and about hospitality and about serving as the waiter, which it seems that he did, and about instructing his wife to prepare bread for them and instructing Yishmael to get involved as well. During all of that, he was communing with Hashem. That's what we've learned from Abarbanel. To me, what it brings to mind what Rabbi Sol Salanter says here about Chanoch, but of course, the great Musar thinker is telling us something which is not beyond the grasp of the common man or woman, which the prophecy of Abraham certainly is beyond our ken, but rather, according to Risol Salanter, a person who's doing a task, he's employed to do a task, or whatever it may be, if he does so with full attention and giving it his every exerting every effort to do it in the best way that he can, that itself is a form of divine service because he's emulating the ways of Hashem. Problem is that this novel idea, I find a very inspiring idea, at one and the same time seems to a bit devalue the greatness of Chanoch, who is described as someone who was meyached yichudim leboro. Is it really so that he was a tailor? I'm sorry, not a tailor, but a shoemaker. So actually, when we look at the source of this Medrash Talpiot in the original source of the writings of Rama Mipano, actually we find, excuse me, that the meaning is not so much that he was a shoemaker, but rather that he was meyached yichudim, he was bringing together the higher world and the lower world. Not that he was a shoemaker as a profession and he would do his profession very well, and this is described as achieving great metaphysical like insight into the nature of God, but rather it's just a metaphor. He's described al kol tefira v'tefira, on every stitch, and that he was endeavoring to bring together the higher world and the lower world. Now, exactly what that means, I don't know, and how he did it, I'm not quite sure, but the Kabbalists have no doubt a better grasp of it than I do. I read a fascinating essay, and we'll end with this, that um, seeks to explain why or where Rav Dessler heard about this sort of, oral tradition that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said and what he perhaps actually said, because there is a an interesting essay written by a man from Frankfurt who was I think the man from Frankfurt was called, his name is not that important. Hold on, perhaps let me write just to give him credit. His name was Leopold Oppenheimer, and he writes about a certain wealthy member of Rav Hirsch's community in Frankfurt who had a private shul, a private shtibel, and he would invite Rabbanim sometimes to spend Shabbos or some time with them and to speak. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter once visited that shtibel in Frankfurt. And the man, the wealthy man who was the Bal Habayit, asked the great Rabbi Yisrael Salanter to give a drasha to inspire and to edify and to motivate the audience. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was reluctant to do so. He said, when I speak, I'm like giving medicine to my listeners, and a doctor who prescribes a medication needs to know what is the ailment which afflicts his patient. And I don't know the tzibur here, so therefore I don't feel it's right for me to be speaking words of Musa. Maybe there's more to his declining the offer, but he supposedly gave this marshal, and maybe this is the source of the tradition that Rav Dessler also heard about, because Rav Dessler's wife, I think, was a granddaughter of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. There was a family connection, but the mashal that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter gave is, he said, if I'm speaking to tailors or if I'm speaking to shoemakers, I need to give a slightly different message. I'm sure there can be some common features, but he wants to, no pun intended, tailor his message exactly to his audience. And he gave as an example, if I was speaking to shoemakers, then I would tell them that Chanoch was a shoemaker. And he would, when he stitched the shoes, he achieved great things in like unifying his creator by stitching the shoes. What is the meaning? Because he stitched the shoes with such care and such devotion, with a desire to provide the best service that he could provide, so as not chas v'shalom to defraud his patrons or his clients or his customers in any way. Uh, but Rabbi Yisrael Salanter possibly meant it just not as that is the meaning of the medrash, but that would be a way that I could say something to shoemakers which would be pleasing to them. They can think of themselves as following in the tradition, in the footsteps, no pun intended again, of Chanoch, who is described as being so great that he didn't die. Hashem took him into heaven. But if this is the case, then the like Shemua, the teaching, the sort of thought that Rav Dessler records in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter possibly was not intended as the actual interpretation of the Medrash, but almost a sort of not exactly humorous, but a way that he could say something that would hopefully inspire, would be appropriate to a shtibel full of shoemakers, if that were to be his audience. So it's Rabbi Yosef Shisha, Rabbi Yosef Shisha, who lives here in Golders Green, who wrote this essay, which I came across not long ago. And so I just want to give him credit for being my source here. So what have we learned tonight? We've learned about a fascinating machlokus between the Rambam and Ramban, in which Rambam says it was all just a prophetic vision. It was just a kind of like trance. And actually, the whole these events, they never actually happened in reality. Ramban excoriates Rambam for saying such a thing, and he says it's forbidden to hear them, and even more so to believe them. But Abarbanel and others come to the defense of the Rambam, trying with some difficulty to explain what the Rambam really means. And Abarbanel himself has an approach which, in a way, combines both of the two, in which he maintains it was a vision and it was a prophetic interaction which Avram had with the Almighty. That's why the Parsha begins, Vayera elav Hashem, Hashem appeared to him. And the whole story that follows is within that vision. But according to Abarbanel, yes, it did happen. And that's the greatness of Abraham, that he was able to maintain the divine communication throughout while multitasking at the same time. He was able to achieve this specifically after the Brit Milah. And then finally, we've seen how this is kind of reminiscent of this fascinating citation found in Michtam Eliyahu in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter about Chanoch, who was, his greatness lay in the fact, according to this tradition, this teaching of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, his greatness lay in the fact that he was as if communing with Hashem by stitching the shoes in the very best way that he could. I don't know whether I've got any shoemakers on this shira. I don't think we do at the moment. Maybe someone will listen to it on YouTube one time, and maybe it will relate to him. But I think we can all learn from it, hopefully. And thank you to everyone for listening.